Hello, Rotors up. In today's video we're going to focus on oil and what we might use in rotary engines. We have some piston engine parts here that will be explained in a second. First, if you're here just for the answer, the timestamp where it is should be somewhere around here. First thing that we will focus is why we should select our oil accordingly. So we should talk about what are parts in our oil system. So as you can see, we have two renesis engine from RX8 in here. So this will what we will be setting our baseline in. Here we have our front plate. The oil is took from oil pan by oil pickup. Here we have our tube that is coming out into our front plate, and especially in Series 1 RX8 it is going here from this tube to our oil coolers. Let's set this off. After it is going from our oil coolers, it is going to our oil filter base. It is going into our insert in here. It goes into this tube and also to our filter. This tube is going to down of the engine to our oil pressure sensor that we will show you in here footage. When it is going to the pressure sensor, it is also going to our oil regulator down here. This is second oil regulator. When the oil pressure is big enough, it is going to push the spring that is in here, and oil will flow out of these holes in here. As I mentioned, this was our second pressure regulator. First one we have in here, that is putting out pressure before it will go to our cooling lines from this tube over here. And also there is a spring that just with enough pressure it opens and the oil flows down into oil pan from both of regulators accordingly. Next thing that our engine is having, the oil after it is going through filter, it is going outside, putting it inside from this tube into this hole over here, and on our rear plates we have places where it goes into. Our oil goes into basically straight into the bearing, the rear stationary bearing, and also by this tube over here it goes to the front plate. In our front plate the oil is going into two places, at least in RX8. We have the pipe that is going into our front stationary gear bearing, and also with Series 1 RX8s we have this hole over here. It have lines inside over here, and it goes to our OMP. First thing, we're going to focus on our eccentric shaft. So from our front and rear lines inside the front and rear plate, the oil is flowing into our stationary gears bearings, and it goes into eccentric shaft itself. This is same with crankshaft engines, so this should not be surprise over here. So in our front and rear plate, our oil is flowing into our eccentric shaft by stationary gears and its bearings. It have holes that are supplying the oil inside our eccentric shaft. In our eccentric shaft we have, as you can see in here, we have hole. This one is for our thermal pellet. This is OEM thermal pellets. Usually when you're rebuilding your engine, or just when you see that your pressure is too low, you just replace the OEM thermal pellet with just solid one, because this hole over here is only for cold startup. To warm engine a little more, it just flows again into our oil pan. Also our artery is going to holes inside of the places where our rotors will go. From this it will lubricate our rotor's bearing, and we can see here we have a hole. This hole over here have something like this screw in. Here should be also a spring and a small ball. Same thing as with pressure regulators. When this have enough pressure, it will just spray our oil. But where? For this we need to get our rotors in here. The oil is flowing inside of these grooves over here for it to cool the rotors. So as I said, when the engine is on the front plate, it is going through the front cover, it is going to OMP. Now from OMP we have this place over here that is basically just putting the oil into our oil lines. The oil lines goes to our OMP injectors, and this oil over here injected is actually lubricating our apex seals and as important our side seals over here, especially in renesis. The side seals, the corner seals and apex seals are evenly distributed of heat because we have our side ports inside of there, and this is basically the whole system in our rotary engines. Let's maybe compare it to our piston engines. So with some analogies from rotary engines to our piston engine that I have here just basically because I had a rotary car and I thought it will be nice to get a table, we will tell how system in engine as this looks like. We have oil pump over here that I throwed out. This also pumps oil into our grooves. It is going all into our main bearings. In piston engines there are two pieces. One have a hose that will supply oil to our crankshaft, and our piston rod bearings doesn't have places where they are injected because also the oil is injected from the crankshaft. As we will have our bearings inside, they made same purpose as in piston and as in rotary engines. So we have headers that we obviously don't have here. The oil is flowing into the headers, and also the oil from the head is flowing to things like this. This is in our head and pushes our intake and exhaust valves. We can clearly see this here also have holes to lubricate the parts like this, because here we have our hydraulic lifter. It was one of two main problems with this engine because the lifters was stacking, they flow out of the oil, and I can clearly see, I have one, no, this cleared out, but this is hydraulically setting itself to not make a knock when our lobes are pushing against it. This simple engine, we basically need to have high flow rate for us to fill our hydraulic lifters, but this engine had also problem with an oil. We can clearly see this bearing over here, especially this one because the second one is from another piston. This melted, this flattened, and rotated inside of the crankshaft. Probably because the oil was dirty, I didn't have such a big piece of information as I have now. The oil is also flowing inside of our pistons down here. It is cooling the pistons also, but as we can see, this has much less area to give a cold. Oil is lubricating our cylinders by these piston rings that some of them, actually the oil ones, are in 3 pieces. This will supply oil to our cylinders. Second ones will just grab this oil and put them out, and third one is sealing. So as we can see, the oil here is making all of the purposes. But why I will not tell anything about piston engines? Because nowadays the piston engines have variable valve system, which sometimes depends on viscosity of the oil. If we just put it to higher size specification of oil in here, it could freak out. So in piston engines, what I will recommend is going on the forums, going on Facebook pages, on Facebook groups, and reading, not asking, reading questions from other people, especially from people that are making such an engines, because as for example in 350 and 370Z, Nissan recommends, at least for Europe, 5W30 oil, and this is not a rare thing in this type of engines, that we have rot knock, not rot knock, or we have bearing knocks, etc. And it is best to ask these people, the mechanics that are building these engines, for advice. Also, why manufacturer will sell you second engine. The builder have to fix after them. If you don't find a person that is making specifically these engines, it might just be that the engines don't break as often and the oil is set properly. But if you find someone who knows this engine well, just stick with what they said. If you don't know, if you don't find anybody, just see your owner's manual and see what is written there to make in your engines. So as we know what system is in our rotary engines, we should talk why we should choose good oil. Now, there is a lot of variables. First thing, it will be in what flow rate the oil could flow into the smallest piece of equipment, and I can say that pretty much the smallest thing our oil is flowing is oil injector over here. This oil injector have two holes on the side for it to get oil and one nozzle down the bottom for it to spray our oil into the engine. This will be one major thing. Second thing is heat dissipation. When we putting our oil, as you saw, the oil is going into our rotors. The oil accordingly will get higher temperature than in piston engines, because it have much bigger surface area to take our heat from. As so, in rotary engines, this is why the big factor is good oil, because it will dissipate heat. Third thing, it will be lubrication of our seals and our bearings accordingly. With our seals inside the engine, our oil should have actually the oil that will burn well, because it will just the residue that is going from our oil should just get out of the engine, and also lubricate our seals for them not to make too much contact, too much heat, and use up much more than it should. In our bearings, we should actually take under consideration how to get our bearings not to contact the eccentric shaft as well as possible. That's why we talking about oil viscosity. Oil viscosity is what basically SAE specification is telling us. It means 10W40, 5W30. With this, we should just make our consideration in what temperatures we're going to drive, because the temperature outside means the higher temperature inside, etc., etc. But this not telling us the full story. As we can tell, the rotary engines will heat up more than piston engines, so they should have good lubrication and be prevented to and be prepared to less be degraded with temperature and be less of degradation of their film strength and film thickness abilities. So the lower part of viscosity will tell us in which lower temperatures our engine it will be going, and in the higher ones it will be the after W parameters. So going into what oil should I use answer, maybe we should start from what Mazda recommends. Mazda recommends 5W30 for most of the world. There are some places where it is 5W20, I think there is 0W20. This is not enough if we are going to drive into our hotter climates. Yeah, and let's check the basic things. I don't have specification of oil injectors from the previous generation of rotary engines, but I have specification over here what clearance is between the bearing and the eccentric shaft. As I said, the film strength in here is very important, so let's dig into our things. Here I have technical data from RX8, and it says that let me check. The main bearing oil clearance, it should be 45,000 to 85,000 with 4-port engines, and 55,000 to 75,000 into our 6-port engines. But maximum for both is 0.1. I'm talking about millimeters, so here it is. The rotor bearing clearance is 0.6 to 0.8, and maximum is also 0.1. Let us see what are the previous generations engines. Here I have this is what Mazda recommends. Here it is what I have for FD, and as I know, this is also the Mazda specifications. We have eccentric shaft. The main bearing clearance, it is 0.6 to 0.9, 0.6 to 0.9, and it seems to be maximum also some of this. The rotor bearings, it should have clearance 0.6 to 0.8. Let's put this aside. FC, oil recommendation. With FC I have 2 pages. For our rotor bearing it will be 0.4 to 0.8. For our main bearing it will be 0.4 to 0.8. And the FB will be recommendations, and it will be clearance, it will be 0.4 to 0.8 as for main and rotor bearings. So as we can see, we have tighter tolerance, lower tolerances. And let's see what Mazda recommends into previous engines. We have here when there is higher temperature than minus 18 Celsius, it is 10W30, and if there is less than minus 18, it is 5W30. With FC, I found this one beautiful table that is basically telling you in what temperatures oil should you use, but in much further details, because to 0 degrees of Celsius you should use 5W30. If you have over minus 19 degrees of Celsius up to 30 degrees of Celsius positive, you should use 10W30. And accordingly we have 10W40 with it starts with minus 19, and 10W50 that is not on the that the scale is ending, and 20W50 and 40 starts from basically minus 4. And accordingly we have FD sheet that is going from minus over minus 18, 10W30 and below 5W30. The bearing is, I think, one of the most things that used up in rotary engines beside the seals. But if our bearings will go bad, it will go part of the bearings into our oil coolers. It will bypass our oil filter sometimes and damage our internals of the engine. Even if we changed our engine for a brand new one, this might be thing that will kill our engine accordingly. So that when I found out the datasheet for FC, I thought Mazda recommended higher viscosity ratings for oil as the as for later engines, older engines. As for older engines, and I found out I was wrong. Mazda recommends mostly 5W30, but in FC engines there was some hiccup over there. Also, all these are from latest models of rotary engines that we should took under our consideration. Now, with that thing said, we can clearly see that Mazda will recommend you using 30 as most of the climates. In most of the climates it will be your oil to use. But in Australia and some hotter climates you should use 40, accordingly to Mazda. And now let's talk about experience. Many experienced builders will tell you not to use 5W30 in any rotary engines. The community is telling mostly 10W40. And in my opinion, if you would not go below minus 25 ambient temperature, you should be good. You should be good. With lower temperatures, you should take under consideration going into lower first parameter of size specification. That means 5. Maybe if you're driving in higher parts of Canada, you should use 0W. But let's talk about that second part. The rotary engines are high RPM engines, and as I said, they will heat up more than piston engines. And as we talk about, the oil will heat up more than in piston engines. So in my so as most rotary builders will tell you, use 10W30, 5W50 as I heard in UK. In my opinion, we should take under consideration mostly our datasheet from FC. When it says that you should stop using 5W30 when it is over 0 degrees of Celsius in your climate. And I will tell you, the oil will heat up more. So the 10W30 is also not enough in many minds for rotary engines, and switching to higher viscosity gradings is actually making us good. It's making better film strength, maybe the better kind of oil, because the Mazda doesn't use the best oil possible for their engines, And rotary engines, as you can see, are pretty substantial on the oil itself. So that is my opinion. In my opinion, I will use, as I am using now, 10W. I am using 10W40, and in my opinion, we should use higher viscosity ratings than Mazda recommends. As I saw in my car that drove over 15,000 miles, and as I saw the engine that was driving only on the tracks by around 20,000 miles. It is 30,000 kilometers and some kind of 12 something thousand kilometers. I can say 10W30 makes a good job to prevent wear of our engines inside and on the surface areas. Especially, I know in these two engines was used. No, in my engine I am using the Motul 6100 syringe plus. It is good oil. I know the 300V Chrono is also a good oil. So what we just mentioned in here. The Mazda recommends mostly 5W30, 10W30, and I think we should take under consideration mostly FC datasheet. Even Mazda says that 5W30 for rotary engines will be not enough over 0 degrees Celsius. And over 30 degrees Celsius, 10W30 is also not a good option. In my opinion, when the oil is heating much more than in piston engines, we should use higher viscosity gradings. But what about type? We should use the good type of the oil. What is good type? Mostly we will tell about good brands of oil. Especially I am using Motul. Here is Syringe Plus. I know somebody in my area will be using 5W30 Repsol. I think not this Repsol. We'll see how it went for that one person. But also the other brands will be good. Pennzoil, Penrite, Trident, Motul I said, probably liquid moly. Almost all of these oils is used by community and is going good. And this should be enough. If you not going over, in my opinion, if in your climate the oil is not going over 35 degrees Celsius, in my opinion, you should get 10W40, and also if it doesn't go below minus 22, let's say 22, because the oil 10W thickens. In my knowledge, it thickens in minus 27 degrees of Celsius. With all of these things said, yeah, I think we told all about this. So this was my dig up into the engines itself and the oils. If you like content like this, maybe consider giving it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, consider giving it a thumbs down. If you have more knowledge, because I'm not a chemist, I'm not an expert in this kind of situation, I just see everything, process everything and tell you about it. Give me know in the comments below, and if you like content like this, maybe consider subscribing, because we have some of building rotary engines and we will have much more content. And as always,